I guess looking back now, everyone just thought we would have a little bit more time. With our news feeds on a daily basis being inundated with one disaster story after another from the mainstream media, we all just became desensitized to it. We would, of course, send out our thoughts and prayers to those in harm's way, but then go on like nothing had ever changed. But then there was that one day. There was that day that event happened that everyone stopped, and in the ether, it was almost palpable. You could feel the hope just drain away for the future. And that's when everything changed. World governments made decisions that made absolutely no sense at a pace that not even the modern mainstream media could keep up with. Invasions and wars, and the markets that had borne so much uncertainty up until that point finally gave up the ghost and said, we now foresee no future scenario where things can get better, where things can become profitable again, where businesses can flourish. And everything fell apart immediately. Even those who had been saying, prepare now, for years, were absolutely stunned at the pace of collapse. It didn't take months, it didn't take years, it took weeks. And these stories that we saw for so many years of security forces walking through the night amongst fires, it wasn't just liberal cities anymore. It was every city. Because so many people had lost everything. And there were the hardy few that had been preparing, doing their best to dutifully prepare for this time. Even they were asking the question, what is our common definition of survival? Is it actually surviving, or is it maintaining our lifestyle? You see, that breaks up a lot of groups. Some people believe survival means maintenance of lifestyle. And doing one requires a great deal of trust, the other, a great deal of risk. And unfortunately, in a lot of these groups, neither one had been worked on for quite some time. So there were those in the cities who just walked off by themselves. And you couldn't really do it justice with pictures how bad it was. The idea of a city with millions of people and a sewer system that had been unattended to for 6 months. What the smell must have been like. The carrion and the scavengers everywhere. There was no redeeming value left in the city, the idea of it. And all of those stories from the history books that we read of ancient abandoned cities that nobody could figure out why, all of a sudden now started to make sense. You could occasionally find perhaps a warehouse full of things that were mostly expired and were somewhat useless. But occasionally you might find something you could use, and there were these pop-up bazaars and marketplaces where there were things that the proprietors knew you would need or really want, like some aspirin, a bar of soap, some deodorant, some shampoo, some toothpaste, something to make you believe or think for even a moment that things were still normal again. But you see, they had their prices, and sometimes the prices were way too high, and people had to resort to doing things that they weren't proud of. But a weird psychology set in that not many people could understand, and they thought it was bizarre. People were still trading in dollars. And some were just absolutely jaw on the floor, surprised. Why are these people still trading in dollars? Don't they know? Psychology will make people hang on to things that make absolutely no sense. And truly, the people that say the dollar will be worthless are right and wrong at the same time. Because it hasn't been backed by gold for many, many, many years, yet people still value it. So what's going to change in a collapse? Nothing. The psychology is not going to change. Not in the least. It'll give them a sense of normalcy. People will still trade in US dollars because it will give them a sense of peace and happiness and normalcy that they can hang on to, that they can cling to. Anyone else will just be, well, a zombie. Because they won't have any use for dollars. All they will be looking for is what will keep them alive till tomorrow. The mere existence, the exchange of air. That's their entire goal. Get up and breathe. Eat. Do what humans do. And sleep. And they'll go to all this trouble just for that existence, with no other desire in mind. And that's what the Illuminati are counting on. They have a plan. They understand exactly what that psychology is all about. But some will take psychology to the next level. Some will be able to understand the idea of going gray and not seeming as if you have anything of value, and moving quietly. And for those who figure it out, there will be places hidden, underground, very few and far between, where survival will be possible. Perhaps not maintenance of lifestyle, but survival. If you'd like to join us, continuing this discussion on surviving disaster, the shadow economy, and how to exist when existing is a crime, how to thrive in a black market scenario, how to prepare for an economic collapse, join us over at Patreon. $1, the lowest possible allowable level. Even less if you sign up for an entire year. $1 per month for all the videos. This is going to be our new direction. I have personal direct experience in surviving this way. And believe me, there's a lot that I can share. And I know a lot of people probably are already scratching their heads about the whole psychology of the dollar thing. But that we are still using paper money today, in 2022, shows the psychology and the power of it. There were those 100 years ago who thought paper money was worthless. No lie. Because it was a check for a check, basically. The paper money that was initially issued was literally like a bank writing a cashier's check. But then all of a sudden, something happened. People started to value the thing that didn't have any value. And if they can do it now, they'll do it in grid down. But in today's video, the big story out of Brazil is another psychological phenomenon that I would like to cover. The current president, Jair Bolsonaro, just stood for an election against his primary challenger, Lula da Silva. And the mainstream media, the liberals, the misandrists, and the mainstream media thought they had it all figured out. See, they don't like Bolsonaro because he's a strong man and kind of the model of Donald Trump, or perhaps even to some extent Ron DeSantis. And he doesn't take crap from anybody. And he's got the military on his side. And a huge portion of the population of Brazil as well. But then there are those that support Lula da Silva, who's less of a strong man and more of man of the people. You know, less really so much worried about financial gain for anyone, but financial gain for all. But in Brazil, things are very different than they are in North America. Number one, in Brazil, you're required by law to vote. If you don't vote, they will seize your bank accounts. Fact. Look it up. You are required to vote by law in Brazil. You must participate. Not participating is not an option. And both of these guys agree with that. That's the one thing probably the one thing that they actually agree on. But there's a story, and this is actually out of the Netherlands, where they call both men evil. Brazilians are going to choose between two evils. Of course, Jair Bolsonaro being the right-wing strongman, this guy being man of the people, but perhaps a little bit more corrupt. But there's also another rule in Brazil. To be president, you have to win at least 50% of the vote. At least 50% of the vote. One of the reasons Lula da Silva was so popular that when the last time he was president, oil prices were incredibly high and went up from the time that he took office to the time he left office almost by a factor of 4. And so Brazil, being an oil-run state, doesn't have to rely on taxes that much. Now, here in North America, psychologically, when we hear leftist, when we hear spending on social programs, we automatically think the money automatically comes from taxes. Primarily our rigged, progressive federal income tax. This is Jair Bolsonaro, by the way. Most people think the concept of this is wrong. So ergo, anybody who wants to raise income taxes, raise federal income taxes, is wrong. But what if there were no increasing federal income taxes to spend more? What if the money came from the production of oil? What would you think about social spending then? Now, this particular person thinks she has it all figured out. She's a writer for CNN. And this is the trap I wanted to show that people get in. Want versus need. Look up a term called FINDOM, FINDOM 101. And you'll find something that'll terrify you. The election in Brazil was on Sunday, the 2nd of October. This article came out 30 September. And this is key. The leftists up here thought they had it all figured out. You see, the polls in Brazil, and I know this seems like I'm kind of wandering all over the place. The polls in Brazil had Lula da Silva, man of the people, Lula da Silva, winning by 13 points. And the president of Brazil, the current sitting one, was saying no. No, he's popular, yes, but is he 13 points more popular than him? No. No. So here's what they were going to go for. They were going to say, okay, Da Silva's going to win running away by 13 points. And then the strong man, Bolsonaro, is going to claim election fraud just like Trump did. And then use the military to keep himself in power and all this kind of stuff. Well, guess what happened? Guess what happened? Bolsonaro was proven correct. Bolsonaro was supposed to have been down by 13 points. Meaning they were saying that Lula was going to win 53 to 40. Something like that. 55 to 42. Lula technically won 48.4 to 43.2. Meaning just a little over 5 points. So the polls were skewed, even margin of error, 8 points. The polls were skewed 8 points. Now, in Brazil, you have to win at least 50% of the vote to be confirmed winner of a presidential election, regardless of whatever the breakdown is. So now it's going to go to a runoff between Lula and Bolsonaro. But this proves something. This proves they were trying to do exactly what Bolsonaro said they were trying to do. This person here in third place, this Simone Tebet, she's probably got more in common with Lula than she does with Bolsonaro for sure, given that her party is very anti-military. And so if she had just stepped aside, Lula would have won. But she didn't. And that's why Brazil does things this way. Because now in a runoff, who knows? Who knows how many are going to show up? Who knows how many are going to be involved? You see, they blew their wad on this idea. No, like many others authoritarian politicians who risk being ejected from office, the Brazilian president is focusing on unsubstantiated election crimes and casting doubt on the integrity of the election system. Well, wait a minute, Ruth Benjat. Wait a minute. Hold on. You were saying, and your polls were saying, that Lula was up by 13. How is it that in reality, he was only up by 5? Doesn't that prove, beyond the shadow of a doubt, how wildly skewed and wrong the polls were? If in reality, in a country where everyone is required by law to vote, how could your polls be so wrong? See, there couldn't be anyone who was answering a poll who wasn't voting. Let me say this again. There couldn't be anyone who was answering a poll who wasn't voting. So the idea of the polls being off this much versus the actual result shows clearly Bolsonaro was right. How could you poll people and have there be this wild 13-point disparity for Lula, but then when actual voting happened, it was only 5%? It was only 5? I mean, that's a lot. That's a huge margin to be different. Now, in like North America, that would be not a problem. Why? Because not everybody has to vote. There could be 150 people answering polls that don't have any intention of voting. So you don't even know if anybody that you're polling is actually going to vote. That's why they have polls in North America that say among likely voters. In Brazil, there's no such thing. Everybody's required by law to vote. So that likely voters thing, that goes out the door. CNN doesn't want you to look into this. The liberals don't want you to look into this. Because this is a huge smoking gun for what they're trying to do. There's no possible way that those polls could be that wrong without there being something very, very weird happening with how they do this. And Bolsonaro said it. It's a worldwide thing. So I will leave it there. But if you would like to, we would love to have you join us over at Patreon. We're going to talk about black market underground survival and the importance of knowing those skills. There are things that I cannot reveal here that I can reveal there that will help you survive. I guarantee it. Even during grid down, power down, end of the world, there are going to be things that people pay for because they're psychologically addicted to them. I know it doesn't make sense. It doesn't have to. It just is. So I will leave it there. God bless. Like, share, subscribe, and we'll see you guys next time.